Good. As you're coming back, what you will want first is the piece. Well, look, that doesn't show. That's the thing about these backgrounds. There you go. Is this piece of paper that says classic Labyrinth seed pattern. So that's the first thing we're going to play around with.
Can I ask about the Zentangle one? Because I wasn't sure which one you were speaking of. Oh, I don't have that one. Is that not in the packet?
It should be on as part of that PDF that I sent you.
Anyway. I didn't get it either.
Well, I'll show you where it is in Well-Fed Spirit. It's a PDF that you can download, and
that'll work.
I've had some people actually print it out on the ledger, 11 by 17, and then cut it down to a square, and they'll take that into meetings. I'm a person who often, because of some physical stuff that I deal with, I need to kind of keep busy with something. I don't have to think real hard, and it actually helps me listen in meetings. So I'll actually be editing photos in Photoshop when I'm in meetings and stuff. But this one's a real nice for folks who like to doodle and stuff. It's a really pretty design, and there's lots of little intricate details you can color in it with pencils and crayons or whatever. Sure.
What keeps us from using this stuff?
Nothing.
I mean, yeah, I've got a blah, blah, blah center in my brain that says, well, I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And, you know, I'm retired. We've been through a shutdown and I can't find 10 minutes.
Yeah, I hear that. You know, when we went home, we've been home for over a year now, working from our houses, all our staff at Disciples Home Missions. And I think some of our ministry associates thought that meant that they would have lots of time to do things. And the common experience I've heard is all of us as staff are more busy now. In some ways, it's because it's harder to do what we're doing, and so we have to do workarounds. But a lot of us are finding that we're actually just doing more. We're more productive now working from home than when we were in the office, which is an interesting paradigm. But so is Marvin and Cindy, are they with us yet? One of the things that my president, DHM's president, keeps reminding us is to take the time for rest. It is working from home. It is harder to separate work from personal time. And she continues, Sheila Spencer is our president right now. She continues to remind us that it's okay to take some time and rest if you need to rest, and really be careful about your boundaries, work boundaries. Because it's real easy in this pandemic, it's real easy for a lot of people to work more than they should be working, and rest becomes a spiritual practice if you do it with intention. I mean, that's what Sabbath is. It is above all things. Historically, Sabbath is to remind us that God is in charge and we are not. And refusal to rest becomes idolatry really quick.
Warren, I would say go ahead, and I think Marvin will join us when he can, and same with
Okay.
Cindy.
So do all of you have your classical labyrinth seed pattern piece of paper?
No, I didn't print mine out.
Okay, well, you're going to see what's going to happen here. So you have it, and you'll be able to deal with it. What I want you to do is I want all of you to become labyrinth artists, okay? We don't always have a piece of paper with a design on it in front of us. We don't always have a big canvas labyrinth that we can use, or a permanent one somewhere that's available to us. But without too much work, you can create your own labyrinth, classical labyrinth, which is the oldest design we know. It's over 6,000 years old, this design, and it is the design that has tended historically to crop up in cultures, across the world. Sometimes it's square, most of the time it's round, but it's the same pattern. So look at your pattern in the middle of that piece of paper. You may recognize it as a chrismon design. Do you remember the old chrismons that churches used to hang on trees? This is actually a chrismon cross in another life, that some people referred to as Christ into the four corners of the world. It is that cross with those images of moving outward into the four corners of the world. So that's another layer that we've added to this symbol. But if you take, I don't want you to do it right now. I'm going to show you something in a minute, and then we're going to practice it. Do you see the little red X and the green Y at the top? If that red X is on the middle cross, okay, what I'd like you to do right now is I want you with your pen to trace that. Draw over each of those lines. Start with the middle cross, and then out to the side, whichever one you want. I tend to go to the one on the top right. Draw over that L, which is a corner of a box essentially, and then draw over all the corners of the boxes. And then where the other corner of each of those boxes should be, draw over the little dot. What you have just drawn or are drawing now is the seed pattern. So I'll wait till you're done with that. I wanted you to do that just so you had kind of some memory of drawing that design. If you draw that design on a piece of paper, you've created a seed pattern. That's what it's known as. Once you know this tool, this is a really fun exercise to do with children, okay, that they can create their own labyrinths. And then they can do it in worship. As one of those things in worship, they can draw labyrinths. So now, don't do any more of this right now, but now if you drew a half circle from that X up and over and down to that Y, and then you moved left to the next point, which is the top of the backward L, and drew from that over to the next point on the right side, which is the dot, and then you keep moving outward and to the next point and drawing it to the next point on the other side. I want to show you what happens. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Do you see that kind of brown box there? Okay, so watch what happens when we draw this seed pattern and then continue to do what I just gave you instructions to do. So first we're drawing the cross. Now we're going to draw those little corners or L's, and then we're going to put the dots in. And now we're going to connect them. First we connect that middle to the outside, then we go out to each side and connect those. Then we go out to the next points and connect those. And we just keep doing that. Is this making sense so far? So don't draw it on your paper, just watch this. And it just created that classical labyrinth, okay? So what I want you to do is to go ahead now. I'll stop sharing that. Well, I'll keep it up there in case you want to watch it again. I want you to start connecting the dots. So start with the X. And go to the Y. And then go to the next point out on the left side and connect it to the next point out on the right side. And just keep repeating that until there are no more points to connect. Try to keep the lines the same width apart. Is everybody done? Okay. So you have just drawn a labyrinth. Now what you need to know is in this pattern, the width between X and Y is the width of your pattern throughout the whole labyrinth, if you keep them same, okay? So one of the ways you could do this is you could go down onto a beach where there's sand, perhaps as the tide's going out so the sand's slightly wet and firm, and find a piece of driftwood. You could draw this design big enough so that X and Y are wide enough to walk. And then with that piece of driftwood stick, you could start creating a labyrinth on the beach to walk. Okay. You could take this same design with turf paint and go out onto a lawn somewhere and paint a labyrinth to walk. It's just a real easy little tool to have in the back of your pocket. If you're on a retreat somewhere, or you're working with a group in the church and you want to teach, some prayer practice on Labyrinth, but you don't have one, this is just a really easy tool to use. Any questions about that? That little video and the Labyrinth Through the Ages video is on the Well-Fed Spirit Labyrinth page, by the way. And anything you find there, you're free to use and take. And if the language doesn't work for you on handouts that I've made, change the language. I have no problems with people changing my words if my words don't work for you. So the practice is more important than how I or anyone else has framed it. So what I would like to talk about real quickly are 3 ideas for what I term maximizing spiritual practice. I'm going to talk about them in the context of labyrinths, but I believe you can apply these 3 ideas to any spiritual practice. And you might start by thinking of them in terms of Sunday morning worship. Sometimes I think the way we, especially as disciples, do worship often risks moving to the side of intellectual exercise and doesn't seem to make a lot of room for the mystery of the holy of spirit. We tend to be too pragmatic. I think as Sunday morning worship as a corporate spiritual practice, a community spiritual practice, And so one of the ways you can use these three things I'm about to mention is in that term. How do we overlay these ideas into the spiritual practice of worship? But I want to talk about labyrinth walking, and they can be used in any spiritual practice. So the first idea is that our spiritual practice is best maximized when it is contained within ritual and accompanied by symbolic icons. Contained within ritual and accompanied by symbolic icons. I'll come back and explain that in a minute. The second is that our spiritual practice is maximized when it is embodied. And it's not just an intellectual exercise up here, but it involves our whole self. It is an embodied practice. The third idea I have is that our spiritual practice is maximized when it is balanced. Okay, so let's go back to the first one, contained within ritual and accompanied by symbolic icons. By that, I mean that whatever this practice we do, we overlay some ways of doing it that are intentional, mindful, and repeatable. It's not about being high church. It's not necessarily about smells and bells, but it is rather about avoiding laziness. That our practice is contained within these rituals that we can do over and over again. We can do them mindfully, so that what we are doing has meaning rather than just something we're doing. Does that make sense? It's illuminated. Our practice is illuminated with metaphor, creativity, and imagination. Okay. Now, in that, the risk is that our spiritual practice can become too complex. We can overlay too much stuff. And so I think when the ritual that I'm talking, in the sense of the ritual I'm talking about, I think simplicity is your better angel. You don't want it to be so complex that it becomes too hard to do for people, especially if you're leading people. But think about worship. There are rituals all over our sanctuary, or the stuff we do in church is full of ritual. We do it over and over again. Think about communion at the table. It is a ritual. It doesn't have to be complex, but we could risk just getting up there and doing it in a way that it really is, the value and the meaning is lowered, and until it's just we're having a picnic kind of thing. Okay. So I would ask you, what kind of rituals might you bring to labyrinth walking? Is there something you can do at the beginning of your walk, some practice, some action that you then also repeat in the center, and then you repeat just as you come out of the labyrinth? Is there a way you hold your hands while you walk that is symbolic for you? Is there a way of moving around or past people if you're walking as a group that's real intentional, that elevates this spiritual experience, that elevates your connection with God and with others? So what would be the ritual or rituals within which you would contain your labyrinth walk? And it could be different stuff at different times. What you do on the summer solstice may be different than what you do on the winter solstice, if you were going to play with the seasons of how you embody the seasonal cycles of the world in your Christian spirituality. Okay. What are symbols that you could use? Do you carry a cross in your pocket that you might intentionally bring out and hold in your hands as you walk the labyrinth? Is there a stone that has meaning for you? For a long time, I had a stone, a green stone, marble stone from Iona, and I would rub that as I walked through the labyrinth. And then I created a medicine bag, a little leather pouch medicine bag that had one of those Ionis stones in it and had a couple other symbols that were really meaningful to my practice, my walk, my faith. And so I would take and I would find those symbols in the bag. I would feel for them, and they would bring things to mind. Lori Riddell, several years ago, created a link of prayer beads for me and sent it to me as a gift out of the blue. And I will now often use those prayer beads. And they, they each have different meanings for me. Each of the beads do, and I will use those sometimes. But are there icons that you could use? If you were doing a public walk, are there things you could set around the labyrinth that as folks walked, they could see? Is there music, a certain kind of music, or is there stuff you wouldn't put there, you intentionally, mindfully would not do? So what are the rituals and the icons that contain your practice? I think doing that well elevates whatever the spiritual practice is you're doing it. So the second one, it's embodied.
Oh, can I ask a question before
yeah,
we move
you
on?
sure can. Yeah.
So when you were talking about having things set along the labyrinth, I'm asking this and I think I've seen it. It's okay to have like way stops on the way. You understand what I'm saying?
You can, if you want to do an intentional walk. I tend, for the most part, to be in favor of open walks where I don't lay too much stuff over the top of it and impose my practice on somebody else. But there's a walk that I developed with a friend of mine that's a Stations of the Cross, where we overlay the stations on the labyrinth and they stop and read each of the station in turn as they walk the labyrinth. So there are intentional ways to do that. More what I'm talking about is during Holy Week, it seems like I get asked to bring my labyrinth a lot to churches, and then it never gets any use the rest of the year. But during Holy Week walks, I'll often lay palm fronds at the entrance to the labyrinth. I'll place, I have little electric candles now because I've had too many experiences with people knocking over and spilling wax, but I'll place candles around the labyrinth, around the outside of it. Stuff like that. That's what I mean. And I'll talk about that in just a minute with another one that I'll mention later. So that's kind of what I mean. But yeah, it's thinking, how do I contain this ritual, or how do I contain this practice within intentional ritual accompanied by symbolic icons in a way that is open, that has a simplicity about it, is not too contrived, but it elevates the meaning of the walk. So the second one, embodied. I think your spiritual practice can be maximized if it's an embodied practice, that it involves and shapes our whole identity and behavior as children of God. The practice is experienced by and transforms every part of who we are. Sometimes in worship, it seems like most of what's getting transformed is my thinking. So how in worship do we transform all of who we are? Labyrinths are a great practice for being embodied. You ask most average Americans to sit in a chair and meditate, and all of a sudden they will find every place on their body that itches, and it will drive them bonkers. But you ask somebody to walk a labyrinth, and suddenly, because it's a whole body experience, the movement of their body distracts their physicality and keeps their physicality busy so that we can attend to the deeper soul work, if you will. Does that make sense? It's also important to know, one of my dearest teachers is fond of saying that the labyrinth is a map, but it is not the territory. Okay? The territory is our practice. So you can look at a map of the Cascades and find Mount Baker and go, wow, that was a great trip to Mount Baker. But until you're up at the head wall just below the summit, you haven't climbed Mount Baker. Okay. So how do we embody our whole selves in our spiritual practice? How do we involve our physicality? How do we involve all of our senses? You know, one of the things, a lot of you probably know my brother Roger, who's older than I am and just getting ready to retire in a few weeks, over in Helena, Montana for ministry. But when Roger was the pastor in Moscow, Idaho, that's right. I can never remember which one it is. One of the things that he used to do is bake bread for communion each week. But what he did is he got it all ready in his bread machine, and then he set the timer and put the bread machine in the sanctuary so that the night before, or Saturday night, so that when he came in Sunday morning, the bread was just done baking and had filled the entire sanctuary with the smell of fresh baked bread. Okay. It is a way of embodying our senses in that worship experience. You know, it's part of the reason why incense is so important within the Catholic Church, besides other things, because it brings us more wholly into the experience. Okay. So how would you find ways to embody Labyrinth practice? Well, it's easy because we're walking, but what about what we see and what we hear and what we smell, what we taste? You know, I don't know, but it might be fun to play around with that. Are there certain things we do with our body at certain places, intentionally, to make it more than just something we don't think much about as we do? There is a common experience I've often had when I am doing an open walk for a church, where I bring my canvas labyrinth and lay it out, and they invite their church members to come some night to walk the labyrinth. And this sounds almost stereotypical, except it's something I've experienced over and over again. Is a couple will show up, a man and a woman couple will show up, husband and wife, and it becomes real obvious that the wife wanted to walk the labyrinth and the husband came because the wife wanted to walk the labyrinth. Okay. And they come in and they go in and they take their coats off, and they come in and they look at the handouts on the table I've got and maybe pick up a guide, and then they head toward the labyrinth. And this entire time, the wife is in the lead and the husband's behind her. And they go to the labyrinth and they stand there, and the husband just kind of stands behind his wife, and the woman's reading the guide and stands there for a minute and then enters the labyrinth. And the husband immediately follows and enters the labyrinth right behind her. And they walk the labyrinth the entire way till they get to the center. And the husband just follows her in, and they stand there in the center until the wife is ready to leave. And then she walks out of the center and follows the path. And immediately the husband does and comes back out, and then they go and they leave. Husband didn't read anything about the labyrinth. His head was down most of the time. He simply silently followed his wife. So let me ask you, who had this spiritual experience? Whose spiritual journey was the man following? Didn't look like his. It looked like he was embodying his wife's spiritual journey, and he just was following along. And it was more he was being nice and obedient and doing because his wife wanted to do it, but it really wasn't much of a spiritual experience for him. That's what I mean. How do we do it in a way that it brings our whole self into the experience? The third one is balanced. That that we approach the experience with reverence, but it's held within a watchful grace and openness to Spirit's surprising leading, so that we aren't so rigid that we rule out the fluid possibility that Spirit may be in play and leading us in a different direction. That's different than having rules of you don't do this in worship. But it is about entering the practice with a reverence without being tied to this way or no way at all. Okay. It is also about practicing this spiritual practice within a fluid relationship with all other priorities and needs in our life. You may really want to go walk the labyrinth. You may really want to go to church on Sunday morning, but something else comes up and you need to attend to it. Go attend to that other thing you need to attend to, and don't feel guilty about that. Your practice, your life of spiritual practice always needs to be within this relationship with all those other priorities and needs in your life. There may be a time in your life where you can't do something that is really powerful and important to you. And that's okay. Set it aside for a time, because there are other things, and we need to learn to live within that balance. Practice is elevated when it fits within the reality of who we are and how we are in the world. And we can become so disciplined about a certain practice that it ends up not being something that empowers us, but debilitates us, depresses us, feels more like just something that creates turmoil and stress rather than empowering an intimacy with God. Does that make sense? The other thing I would say is that any practice you do needs to be incorporated into a complementary body of diverse spiritual practices to nurture your whole self. Okay. I know people who we call them labyrinth geeks. Okay. I sometimes get accused of being a labyrinth geek, but I know people that it's all labyrinths all the time and nothing else. And they really don't have any other spiritual practice. It's only labyrinths. I think every person needs a body of practice. And I, for sake of argument, I say a handful. We each need at least 5 practices that we are doing consistently, working on consistently, are mindful and disciplined about. But they need to be very different things. I think one of those things needs to be some kind of artistic endeavor. I think one of those needs to be something that has some physicality to it. I think there are pieces that are kind of given for we who are Christians: devotional, biblical work, corporate worship. Those are a couple others that kind of, to me, are sort of, well, those are the mandatory ones. Those are the classes you have to take. But find the other electives that fit in and are complementary to each other. And that body of practice is going to be different. But if you're only doing one kind of spiritual practice, I think it's too easy to fall over and into an unbalanced life. You need to attend to your whole soul, if you will. Does that make sense? And so I think with labyrinth work itself, that it needs to be in the context of being balanced. It needs to be embodied, and you need to be contained within rituals without becoming too overburdening and stifling, not having too many layers. Okay. So within that context, what I'd like you to do is find the handout that says Walking Labyrinths at the top. And I will tell you, this is a guide. Let's see if I can do that. This is a guide that I use a lot. You can print this off of Well-Fed Spirit again, and you will see there's a little line right up here. That's because after printing it, I cut off that blank side. So it ends up becoming kind of a narrow piece of paper. It's easy to hold for folks to use while they're walking, and it just makes it look a little different enough that it feels unique. For folks who have not done much labyrinth work, this tends to be what a lot of people refer to as Labyrinth Walking 101. Okay, this tends to be the generic model for walking labyrinths. Early on, labyrinth facilitators talked about a three-step process. Lauren Artris, the kind of really the mother of the modern labyrinth movement, especially in North America, but even globally to some extent, early on in her work talked about the threefold path. She has since moved to what we refer to as a fourfold path. The difference is the first step here is an added step from earlier work. So if you read books about labyrinths, you'll often see three steps to using labyrinths. The additional one here is just simply this first step. And Lauren Artris, I, and some others have come to believe that it's really, really important to have that first step. So what I tell people is that if you've never walked labyrinths before, or you don't specifically know what you want to do, this is a great kind of generic way to approach labyrinth work, okay? It is also a suggestion. So if you feel like you have to follow this and you can't do what you want to do, no, you do what you need to do. I tell people, if this is not your cup of tea, please put down the piece of paper and do what you need to do. The other thing I tell people is don't go into the labyrinth with this up at your face reading it. Remember, this is a map. This is not the territory. If you have the map in front of your face, you're going to miss the beauty of Mount Baker. Okay, so let's talk about this. There's a sort of, what's the term I use? Is it a mnemonic? The four words that start with R. That's my contrived way of doing it in a way that maybe folks might remember more easily. So that's just kind of contrived. But the first stage, remembering, it's what you do before you go into the labyrinth. It's stopping to mindfully take stock of what you're here to do. And I think it's important to begin the work with a sense of gratitude and blessing. Whatever you're there to do, to grieve, to just experience silence, to stop and remember who you are and whose you are, that you are a blessed child of God. Take time to consider, what is it you want to do when you're on the labyrinth? How do you want to walk? Is there something that you're working on in particular? And if you're walking in a group and there's a big line, you can kind of get anxious and be upset that you're having to wait so long for your turn to get on the labyrinth, or you can use that as an opportunity to prepare, okay? When you're ready, you step onto the labyrinth and start walking toward the center. And we move into this second phase, releasing. It is always true that as you enter into a time of contemplative work, you are likely to be confronted with distractions, things that rise up in your mind, a place on your body that's tense or whatever. And so we use this time from the time we enter the labyrinth to the time we get to the center of simply moving past distraction, releasing those things that get in the way of us being present to God's presence, okay? You can do that in a lot of ways. Some ways of doing that are through breath work that we've already done a couple times in our first session, that kind of stuff. Some people will remember the generic term, kind of the secularized term, is a mantra, but it might be a little snippet of scripture that's particularly empowering to you right now, simply repeating quietly, slowly, that little snippet of scripture. Maybe it's a verse of a song. Maybe it's a word that you're working on. Maybe it's a question that you're working with in your life right now, over and over again. Not listening for an answer, but just doing that. It can be a lot of things. I've known people that I've watched walk, and they literally, they'll take something out of inside them, this imagination, and they'll set it down by the path and then move on. And you'll watch, they'll walk and they'll stop a little bit later and they'll take something out and they'll lay it down. They physically set aside these things that are bouncing around in their head, that monkey chatter, that, You know, do you have everything you need for that dinner you're going to tonight? Or, boy, I'm not sure what I need to say in this part of my sermon, or whatever. It's about letting go, however you do that. For me, breath work is something that I found most helpful. Okay. Once you get to the center, we get to that third stage, the receiving. Hopefully, you've moved past enough distraction that you're open to hearing what it is that is there for you to receive. Okay. I can't tell you what that is, but as long as you want to stay in the labyrinth, in the center of the labyrinth, however long or short that is, this is the place to receive, to listen for what gifts God has to give you. Now, there's a misconception that a lot of people hope that what they receive is the heavens opening up and the angel choirs singing and something big and dramatic and insightful. Most of the time, what happens in labyrinths is a quiet stillness, and you don't hear that clear, concise answer. It is just the accumulating silence of God's presence. I'm one who tends to believe, as I've said before, in this loud, noisy, distracting world that exhausts us. An intimate moment of quiet presence with God is probably one of the best gifts we can receive. And it tends to have an accumulating effect on our lives. When you're ready and you decide it's time, you exit the center of the labyrinth and you follow that same path back out. And this is that fourth stage. This is what I call resolve. This is where we say, okay, that happened in the labyrinth. So what do I do with it? How do I take that and begin to integrate it into my life so that when I step off the labyrinth, I am not the same person, however, in tiniest small way, I am not the same person who stepped onto the labyrinth to begin with. What do I need to do so that this thing that I begin to integrate in my life goes with me and continues to change and transform me? It's the kind of work that you go to church on Sunday. Sandy Messick is guest preacher, and she preaches this amazing sermon. And even though you're watching her on Zoom, she says this amazing thing that just touches your life. And church is over, and you turn off Zoom, and you go in to make lunch, and you're sitting down to eat your bowl of soup, and you go, what was that Sandy said? I can't remember. It's the work that keeps that from happening. It's it's that little bit of time where you take to go, okay, what do I do with that? So that you are able to take it on with you. Does that make sense? So it's 4 stages. What you need to know is that any of those 4 stages can happen at any point on the labyrinth. Okay. It's artificial to say this is what you do when you start, this is what you do in the center, this is what you do when you leave, kind of thing. But it's helpful. It's helpful as a kind of process, as long as you hold it within a watchful grace of openness for Spirit's surprising leading. That's that balanced approach. I've seen people step onto the labyrinth, and within 3 steps, they are bawling because something has touched their life. They have already received this thing. And they spend most of their time, almost overwhelmed by this powerful thing that has happened to them that has opened them up emotionally. And they come out, and now they've got to figure out, okay, but I didn't ever do the releasing part. I didn't even was I distracted by that? Well, maybe the other things didn't happen. So it's artificial. You might walk the whole labyrinth and not receive anything other than you had a little nice time out. Well, that's a great gift. A little time out from the world, walking a labyrinth isn't a bad thing. So does that make sense?
I keep getting thrown by the word artificial because that makes it feel like not real, artificial. But that's not what you're saying. What you're saying is it's not set. I
Yeah,
mean, if that's what you mean. Is that what you mean?
Artificial means the experience wasn't real to you. Or it was contrived and you were just going through the motions, if you will. Does that make sense? I hardly ever preach anymore, which is, to be honest with you, not a bad thing. I've got a genetic lung disease, and what I've learned is there are a couple things that I physically can't do, at least in the way that I did them in the past, and I can't really figure out a way to do them now differently. But preaching has a rhythm. Preaching has a lung rhythm to it, proclamation, that it exhausts me. I can barely get through a sermon breathing because of that kind of cadence that we often see, and at least in how I preach. The other thing is I can't sing. I will say the words during hymn singing, but I do not have the lungs to sing anymore. Now, as people will say, I never was a very good singer, but I love to sing. I can't do that physically anymore. So we do what I don't know where I was going with that. We do what we can do, but it has to be real, you know. Any questions about that? Any ideas, any thoughts?
So it's a thought. It kind of has to do with the artificial and making it yourself, and the differences in how we walk. I think. Well, I'll just say I was having a conversation with someone the other day who was talking about his walking practice, and that he walks fast and gets his heart rate up, and it's in that he gets into kind of a spiritual connection. And we think of walking meditation as very slow. We think of Labyrinth as very slow, and yet we walk at different speeds. So I guess then my question is, what is Labyrinth etiquette around being in a group in a labyrinth and the different speeds that we walk at?
I think that it's about being aware, being self-aware, and aware of others. There is nothing that says you can't move around somebody. Okay. And some people walk faster than others. I think the moment that you catch up to somebody and then slow down and just stay behind them, so my question at that point is, whose walk are you walking? Are you walking your walk, or now are you walking that other person's? Well, maybe you wanted to slow down, or maybe you've stopped walking the walk you need to do, and so you need to move around them. But you step out of line, you watch where you were, which path you were on, and how many lines you stepped over, but you step out and you follow them around. But you don't also step out and cut them off, kind of thing. If somebody's coming at you, I generally will step off the path, and very often they will too, but if they don't, it's okay. And we pass and we get back on and keep going. That's kind of the etiquette. It's pretty standard etiquette, and I think self-awareness that you don't touch other people on the labyrinth. Now, you'll see really close friends who might mutually hug each other when they come meet each other on the labyrinth, but by and large, it's kind of standard. You just don't touch people on the labyrinth. You attend to your stuff and let them attend to their stuff. It probably would be distracting if you ran the labyrinth during a group walk, but that's very different than walking faster than other people. So it's, use good judgment, use sensitivity, practice the practice in a way that's reverential toward as other people as much as toward yourself. Does that make sense, Sandy?
Yep, thank you.
The other thing that I will often do with kids is I'll let them, if they're just by themselves, I'll let them run the labyrinth and play on it. I don't know whoever made the rule that you can't run in church, but there are times, Sunday morning worship, you don't probably want kids running in church, but any other time, if they want to run in church, then we talk about we talk about balance, that there are times for that and there are times that that's not appropriate. And we learn that, but we don't learn the hard and fast, never, ever, ever kind of thing. Sometimes what I'll do with kids is I'll let them run and then I'll let them walk it. And then we talk about how each of those felt. What were the feelings that came up? Very different feelings come up, and generally both sets of feelings are fine and appropriate. They're just different. And so we learn that's a really good spiritual lesson, that we don't always have to feel the same way. And different situations call for different feelings. And that's okay. So you've seen those 4 stages. Now let me tell you how I've taken these 4 stages and overlaid some stuff and done a very different thing. Winter solstice, what in the Christian tradition we've often translated as longest night. It's often late in Advent, and it is that longest night, shortest day of the year. And fair many churches will do something called Blue Christmas. You may have heard that, where we do ritual, we do worshipful ritual in a way that says, contrary to what the world tells us that Christmas should be a happy, fun, celebrative time, there are lots of people for whom it is exactly the opposite. And we need to honor that and find ways to help them in that experience, which is very different than what the world often tells us we need to be about. So longest night labyrinth walks often become about that dark night of the soul, about attending to those less popular experiences of depression, of grief, of loss that are also still with us, even though Christmas season tells us it's a happy time. What I will do often is I put out a big metal sandbox on a table and invite folks to come in, and either before or after, if they want to, these are all optional, if they want to light a candle, to remind themselves that even in the darkest time in our lives, there is still a little bit of light. And by lighting a candle, we proclaim it defiantly, there is still light in my life. And maybe name that light, Christ, God, Spirit, whatever. And then I have some stones, some polished stones there, and a basin of water. And I have them pick up a stone, choose which stone they want, and pick it up. And as they walk with it and rub that stone, continue to think about what in their lives is weighing them down. What is the darkness that is weighing them down in their life? And begin to rub that reality into the rock. This grief of the loss of a child is what's weighing me down, and I'm rubbing that into the rock in my memory as I walk. And when you get to the center, you stay there and you proclaim, even if you don't feel it, that God is with me in the weight and darkness of this season. And when you're ready, you leave and you walk out. And as you walk out, you drop that rock, you release that rock into the basin of water as a symbol that whether you feel like it or not, God is washing away that weight and that darkness from your life. You've essentially done the same thing, kind of 4 stages. What are you going to do when you get here? What do you do as you go in? What do you do in the middle? What do you do when you come out? But you've laid over this other kind of set of rituals that's fairly simple, but has some things that are icons, that have some ritual to them, that become symbolic of our whole being. The other thing that I will often do is I will use music, because especially for folks who don't do a lot of this contemplative work, utter quiet silence can be really, really uncomfortable to the point that it can debilitate their experience. So I will often play music. And what I've found is I want to avoid music that is familiar, because the moment you start playing Amazing Grace, an instrumental, quiet, Amazing Grace, folks start singing Amazing Grace in their minds, and suddenly Amazing Grace, the song, is what distracts them from attending to what they need to attend to. And so what I've done is I will do either a song cycle of Native American flute music, because it tends to be airy and contemplative and a little bit simple, but none of it brings up a song to them. Or I will play early church music. Now, by that I mean I used to do Gregorian chants, and until a couple of women told me, you know, Gregorian chants is really oppressive to me. That male slow deep voice is really oppressive. And then I found some earlier church music that was authored, created, and sung by women. Anonymous 4 is a group that has a lot of that kind of early church music, and none of it is stuff that folks will go, oh, I'll sing along to that, I know that. And so it tends to be quiet, it tends to be contemplative, but it's unfamiliar, and I play it fairly quietly. Music is another ritual or icon that I will have as a part of it. But that longest night is a place where I've taken this 4 stages and really kind of changed it up for a very different experience. So there are lots of ways to use labyrinths, and I think if you're going to use labyrinths, one of the biggest lessons you can learn is that please have the freedom to be creative and make up your own liturgies. Okay, it's fine. Your liturgies will probably work better for you than Warren's liturgies that he created for him, kind of thing. So I would say to do that, start with your intention. Why are you coming to the labyrinth? And then consider some small ritual or symbol that might enhance the experience. Like I said before, a simple prayer or verse of a song or something that you carry in your hands. One consideration is, do you go barefoot or with shoes? Now, I usually, because my labyrinth gets used in a lot of places, I ask people to take off their shoes because it helps keep the labyrinth clean. But I also talk with people about how removing our shoes is physically, viscerally, a way of communicating to our body that something different is about to happen. Think of the places in your life where you take off your shoes. You get home from a long day, you take your shoes off, and your body goes, oh, it's time to relax. You go play outside, you take off your shoes as a kid, whatever. Taking off shoes, I think, is a way of telling our bodies that something different is about to happen. It also puts you in touch with the ground. You know, the scripture of take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. It reminds us that this place we are stepping onto is now holy ground. It's different. It's a different kind of place. It's not, you know, it's just canvas. You know, when God told Moses to take off his shoes, it wasn't that ground over there was different than that ground back there. It was that a new intention had been set, and the intention makes this space now holy, if you will. So think of, you know, what do you want to do here? And then how do you add things to it? Next, consider how to enter your whole self. How do you symbolically leave distractions at the entrance? How might you walk mindfully with an intention? How do you savor each step along the way and pay attention to each step? One of the dangers of labyrinth walking is the risk that it is all about the journey to the destination. The destination is what counts. Whether the destination is the center or the destination is at the entrance when you finish, it's all about getting there. I think that's a male archetype that needs to be balanced with a feminine archetype that I refer to as homemaking. Okay, we've got the pilgrimage to the Holy Lands that used to be, you know, historically that was a male journey. It was wealthy land owning males who in the Middle Ages did pilgrimages to the Holy Lands. Okay, so in democratizing that, how do we take this male model and balance it with a more feminine model historically, traditionally, of homemaking. So how do you make a home in each step along your way to what will inevitably be a destination? Does that make sense? How do you abide in this step? Not worrying about the next step, even though you're going to take it and another one, but how do you abide well in this step right now, in this short little moment? And then reach out, how do you abide in that step? Does that make sense? Because we can get so caught up in the destination that we never experience, we never abide in the actual journey itself. Let's see, what else was I going to say? How do you focus on the quality of your breath? You know, do you not pay attention to how you're breathing? Because how you're breathing will affect how your body is. We tend to breathe very shortly, kind of right here. We need to breathe in this whole breath that we are taking. Pay attention to your surroundings. Watch other people on the labyrinth. What does God have to teach you by what you see and notice with other people and what they do and the things that are happening? You know, you're down walking this big orange labyrinth at the Seattle Center and you look up and happen to see the Space Needle. What does a Space Needle have to say to you about life in this world, your relationship with God, your relationship with the more than human world and other people? How does it become an icon for you? It's an ordinary part of surroundings, but in spiritual practice, it can become something very holy that through which God can teach us. So pay attention to what's happening. You know, how is this turn like a certain part of my life? Notice your senses. Do you smell anything? Is it warm? Is it cold? So you want to enter in fully to this place. And finally, I think the biggest thing I would say is be ready to let that still small voice of God lead you to change your intentions. Okay, whether you call that still small voice, you know, God speaking or intuition or the little voice in the back of your head, don't push that down. At the very least, acknowledge it. If it's simply a distraction, let it go. But it might actually be, you know, God speaking. Pay attention. That's probably one of the hardest things we have to learn in our practice, is paying attention to that dang little voice in the back of our head rather than suppressing it. Pay attention. You know, when you get to the center, pay attention. Most people go in, are there for a very short time and walk out. Pay attention. Do you need to stay a little longer? Pay attention. Listen. Listen for the voice. Okay? Let God lead you into some playfulness. Do you need to skip or dance a little bit? Twirl your arms, spin through the labyrinth? You know? Are you willing to look goofy in the eyes of other people? Because you just need to dance. Experiment on the path. What happens if I step over one line? I'm going to do it intentionally and see what happens. What happens if I step over 4 lines? You know, I don't have time today to walk the whole labyrinth. So I'm going to walk into the center, spend a short time, say thank you, God, and just walk straight off the labyrinth. Nobody ever said you had to walk in, stay, and then walk out the whole path. There aren't any real rules, but people see all those lines and think we're supposed to color within the lines. Does that make sense? Be playful. You know, let God say it's okay to break those rules every once in a while. You know, maybe you just want to walk straight into the center and sit there. And that's okay. Okay. So any questions before we move on? Got a couple more things to do, and then we'll be pretty much done. But I want to show you something, and then we're going to do another little exercise. But I want to give time for you to offer any wisdom or ideas or questions here. Yes,
Well,
Virginia.
I just want to say this has been one of the most interesting and wonderful second Saturdays we've had.
Well, thank you.
I'm sorry I was late.
Well, but you made it.
I did.
There you go.
Thank
Okay.
you, thank you, thank you. And thank you, Sandy.
Okay. Well, I'm going to share my screen then and show you a couple things. Let's see. Share screen and share my browser. Okay. Do you see my browser window? Okay. This is Well-Fed Spirit website. Now it's, it's not the best website. It's kind of quirky, but what I've tried to do is curate spiritual practice resources. When I was early on in pastoral ministry, what I realized that as disciples, we didn't have a lot of places to go to for kind of comprehensive resource of spiritual practices. And so you had to go out and hunt and pick and choose. And when the internet came along, there was lots of stuff out there, but you had to go find it. And so what I've done is tried to curate all of that, add to it a few of the resources I've made myself, and then sort it by subject matter. So this is the opening page. If you just go to wellfedspirit.org, you'll come to this page, okay? Now there's a wellness side, and it has a few resources. It's not a ton of stuff. Spiritual practice is the biggest side. So you click on spiritual practice, this box right here, and it comes up with a huge menu of different practices. Each main page also has a kind of a colloquial little kind of definition or explanation of a particular practice over here, and each page generally has a photograph of some kind that somehow, even if really tenuously, relates to that subject matter. And one of the things that somebody said once, she said, I go to your website and I go to a particular spiritual practice page, and I look at the photo and I contemplate on the photo what does that tell me or teach me about this practice. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I never thought of that, but it's there. So you go over to the side, you will notice that there's a large section of arts as spiritual practice. They're all alphabetical. So I'm going to go down to Labyrinths as spiritual practice and click on that. This is the Labyrinth resource page. And there's lots of stuff from how to build labyrinths, all the guides you've seen today, graphics of different kinds of labyrinths here. And you click on any of those links and it will bring up lots of resources to use. Okay, a lot of it is stuff that's out there elsewhere. The kinds of practices that I've tended to curate on Well-Fed Spirit are practices that essentially say, this is a great idea, you might want to try it. If you don't like it, it's no big deal, but it's not the end all to end all. What I try to avoid curating is the kind of stuff that says, this is a practice you must do, and if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell. Okay, I don't think that's helpful. It ignores who each of us is uniquely and how we are all different. And not everything speaks to us. You will find a lot of Christian stuff on here, and you will find some stuff that is more than Christian. Especially when you get into the contemplative stuff, you will find some Buddhist resources that are more about philosophically how you do something, over which it's real easy to overlay our Christian value and understanding. One of the interesting things when I was looking for community as spiritual practice, the folks who had the most to say about holy community were Unitarians. And if you think about it, that makes sense, because a Unitarian congregation has to bring together a mutual community of people who have widely more diverse realities of experience than we ever will in any one of our Christian communities. And so community is really important. How you do community as spiritual practice is really important to them. But anyway, so at the top of the Labyrinth resource page, you will see this blue pillbox up here, and you can click on that. By the way, I want to go back and show you something. The main banner, do you see this main spiraling banner? That is, I colorized that. I added the color to that in Photoshop, but that originally was a photograph of a paper cut banner that Lori, Riddell, and Joan, I blanking out on her last name, Joan.
Dennehy.
Thank you. Lori and Joan did.
My unmute button quick enough. Yes.
I know. I kept going to her prior last name, and I was like, no, that's not right. Anyway, that originally was a cut banner that hung in Queen Anne Christian Church that Lori and Joan did. And then I think it came and it hung in Turner Lectures one year, and I had taken a picture of it. And so I colorized it, and that's kind of the symbol that I've used for Well-Fed Spirit. So let me go back. Just wanted to mention that and honor that. This pillbox at the top. So if you click on that, you come to the North American Labyrinth map. There are a few labyrinths in Mexico that I've got, but let's just concentrate on the United States. So if you click on the United States map, so what state am I going to click on? First person gets it.
Washington. Click on Washington.
Oh, there you go. So I'll click on Washington. Brings up a map of Washington. Every purple dot you see there is, and they're usually grouped a purple and a pink dot together. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Every set of dots is where a public labyrinth that is available to walk is located. The purple dots are almost always a Google Maps satellite view of that labyrinth. The pink dot is a link to other resources, information about that particular labyrinth. So let's, and then these pink boxes tend to be urban areas that have a denser number of labyrinths, and so I couldn't put them on a state map, and so I've created an urban map. So let's go to Seattle.
Okay.
Or should we go to Spokane, Sandy?
Okay, yeah, let's go to Spokane.
You should go to Spokane.
Yeah.
I know
okay,
there's
let's.
Spokane.
So there are to my knowledge, and labyrinths are being built and created weekly around the world, daily around the world sometimes. And so there may be others I don't know about. And I tell folks, if you know about another permanent labyrinth, not portables, but permanent labyrinths that are there and that you could generally go up to and walk, even if you need to call ahead and say, hey, I'd like to come walk your labyrinth. Is it okay? And they'd say, sure, come on out, you know. But these are where those permanent labyrinths are. So I'm going to just go to, let's go up here to the north side, and I'll click on that purple dot. And we're going to bring up Google Map. Do you see the Google Map coming up?
Oh, at Country
And
Home.
there is that labyrinth. Now, if I zoom out, you can see that, yep, that's Country Homes. But the other thing is that now you can get directions on how to get there. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the map, but I'm going to click on the pink dot. There on the Worldwide Labyrinth Locator, which is not my site, it's another site, there's the listing for Country Homes Christian Church. It gives you their website address, it gives you information, a phone number to call, an email. So each of the labyrinths has that.
Wow.
So if we went out here into the valley, Spokane Valley, you'll see right there is a labyrinth. That's at the UCC church where my brother was an interim. And when he started there, several weeks or a month in, he was talking with folks, and he was talking. He said, "You know, we ought to think about getting a labyrinth or doing stuff with labyrinth." And some lady said, "Oh, we have a labyrinth."
What?
And he said, "Well, where?" She said, "It's out there in our lawn." He walked out and saw no labyrinth, and she said, "Yeah, look." And she started pulling away some grass, and there was a brick labyrinth. You know, the lines were brick, but the pathway was lawn. they had stopped using it and it had so overgrown. And so while my brother was interim there was a young adult lady who came in and spent weekend upon weekend out there slowly weeding that labyrinth
Oh,
until they brought it back and made great use of it. But each page has this. So we're going to click and go back to Washington, and we're going to go to Seattle, probably where some of you are. So there are where all the permanent labyrinths are in Seattle.
gosh.
You see, there's a ton of them in kind of the relatively downtown area, several on Bainbridge. So
If you go to North Seattle, see what's in there.
okay, North Seattle, that's the Edmonds one. That's probably the one that at the old Edmonds Church location. Yeah, I honestly don't know if it's still there or not.
Are these current pictures or are they?
That's the current Google Maps satellite link. So if I click on the pink button, oh no, that was a labyrinth at, anybody know St. Albans Episcopal Church?
I think I've heard
Okay,
of it.
Yeah.
that's where that is. Okay, that's where that one is right there. Green dots, if you find, there aren't a lot of them, but green dots are for trained labyrinth facilitators who've asked to be linked on the site, and I've created a page for them.
Oh,
And I know BJ through a couple labyrinth groups, international labyrinth groups I'm a part of. But you know, if you wanted to call up BJ and say, hey, I heard about you, saw information about you on Warren Lynn's labyrinth map, and wondered if you could come lead a labyrinth walk for us. It looks like she has some labyrinths that she works with and could bring or help you with. So, but that's the kind of thing that's there. Anyway, that's the map. And so it's always there, always ready for you to say, you know what, I want to go walk a labyrinth today, and look around and see. And what you might find is there's several in your area, but you might find one that you like particularly better than another one. I know some people who, when they go on vacation, look at the map to find a labyrinth where they are on vacation. I can tell you that Gwynwood is on the map. Gwynwood has 2 labyrinths, I believe. And Cane Ridge West is on the map. I don't know if there are any others. Anyway, so it's there to use, and any of the resources are there to use.
wow.
Okay, any questions about that?
Very impressive. You've gone to a lot of work to develop all this, Warren.
Well, I tend to, there were a lot of people that were asking, how do we find labyrinths? And there is that worldwide labyrinth listing out there that will tell you about all, you know, you can type in a town and it will tell you all the labyrinths that are there. I tend to be a real visual person, and that doesn't tell me where contextually in town it is, because I don't know what address is where. And so I wanted something that showed me visually where the labyrinth was. The other thing that I would suggest, that if you're at all interested in labyrinths, you might do some work regionally to see who maybe has the Canvas portable labyrinths in your region. There are probably at least a few churches, I don't know if your regional office does, but make a list of those so that people know who they can call. I believe the UCC church up in Bellingham has a Canvas labyrinth.
I think First Christian in Tacoma has one.
So, you know, it might be that you talk with those folks, see if they're willing to either loan them or bring them to another church, and then curate a list of labyrinths, portable labyrinths that are available regionally to use. So there's that. The last thing I really have to do, that I want to do for you, unless any of you have questions at this point. Oh, the other thing I'll say about Well-Fed Spirit, do any of you know what Easter eggs are, referring to websites and stuff? You ever heard somebody say, oh, if you go to this place, there's an Easter egg on that page?
No.
Easter eggs are hidden little links to something fun. Okay. Well, I took that literally, and on some pages, you will find Easter eggs, little oval colored dots that look like a little dyed Easter egg. And if you click on them, they're just links to fun little things that tend to be somewhat about that spiritual practice. And they're scattered throughout Well-Fed Spirit. So go on an Easter egg hunt and see if you can find those. Okay.
Warren, excuse me, I don't know if I heard, I maybe missed the very beginning. Are you in Indianapolis or where are you?
Yeah, I am in Indianapolis.
Okay, thank you.
And in a few weeks, I guess, is it a few weeks, Sandy, that I'm going to be in Helena?
Oh, are you going to be in Helena too? Yeah.
Yep.
What is
Randy
it?
Cuss.
About 3 weeks, 2 weeks?
Yeah.
End of
Randy
the month.
Cuss and I are coming out to be in Helena for my brother's retirement. So anyway, I'm trying to think. Are any of you in Montana? They're okay. There are several really nice ones over in Montana that I love. And there are some great labyrinths in Washington State, and it's fun just to kind of look around and see where some are. Anyway, what I would like you to do now is pull out that more complex Chartres labyrinth that you had. That might have been the one you got dizzy on walking. This one though, pull that out and set it on the table in front of you. I'm going to do a little exercise here.
You mean this one?
Yep, that one.
Okay.
Set it so the entrance is toward you. Now find a comfortable posture for your body. Again, check in. Are you sitting how you want to sit? Comfortable posture. Place your hands in your lap. Close your eyes. Check in with your breath. Are you breathing slowly, deeply, restful? Just breathe for a moment. Check in with your body. When you're ready, open your eyes and simply take a look at the labyrinth with your hands in your lap. Take some time to notice its features, the turns, the varying ways that some of the rounded sweeps of the labyrinth are longer, some are shorter. Some are close to the center and some are way out at the edge. Most are somewhere in the middle. Pay attention to whatever else you notice. Just time to look, savor it. Pick out details that jump out at you. If this labyrinth pathway was a symbol of your personal Christian faith, what might God have to teach you about your life? As ideas come to your mind, you can simply give thanks to God and look for another truth or bit of wisdom. Or you can write it down real quickly and then consider something else. But if this labyrinth pathway was a symbol of your Christian faith, what might God have to teach you about your life? For each thing you notice, don't forget to give God gratitude for this new noticing or this affirmation of something you already knew. Take as much time as you want, but when you're ready, those of you who turned your cameras off can turn them back on. Those of you whose cameras are still on, simply look up at your camera and I'll know you're ready. But take the time you want. We're on your timeline, not mine. Okay, I think we're all back. Does anybody want to share?
Yes, I can again. I don't want to be dominating. Uh, But this reminded me of a retreat I went on many years ago, and I ended up with almost the same theme of kind of bloom where you are planted. And that this sort of said to me that I'm planted, I have solid roots, but that I'm also open to blooming, which this thing in the middle reminded me of blooming. Um, so it's this sort of thing of have fun, flow with things, bloom where I'm planted. But anyway, pretty much what I've said. Also that not many rough edges, but then I suddenly realized, yes, there are some rough edges around the way outside. So they're still there, but most of them are kind of round, soft edges. And that's kind of where I feel like I am at this point in my spiritual journey.
Rosemary,
Yeah.
that design in the center, do you know what that is? Chartres Cathedral was designed to pay tribute to Mary, the mother of Jesus. And one of the symbols for Mary is the rose.
Oh.
And that is the rosette of the Chartres Cathedral, symbolizing a rose.
Yeah.
So it is literally a flower blooming in the center there.
Lovely. I like it. Beautiful.
Anybody else?
I initially kind of focused in on there's dark, empty spaces. And I thought, well, maybe that's a little morose. But I said, so they could also be spaces of opportunity as opposed to just dark, empty spaces.
Okay. Okay.
Well, Jennifer, actually, that also came to mind for me. But it was pay attention to the negative spaces because there's beauty there.
Ah,
Very often on labyrinths of this style, especially if at the turns, if they're wide, if those dark spaces are wide, folks will often use those to step off the path for rest.
hmm.
I like that. Yeah.
And so they become this space that's open to whatever you want to use. But that's interesting.
Hmm.
Okay.
You know, I in tracing, you know, it occurred to me that as with life, you think you're to this goal, and then no, it sends you off in a way that's in a place that seems further away from what you've hoped for or wished for, but life it circles you back to the place you're supposed to be.
Hmm.
And that really struck me in doing this.
And you have to trust the path, because dang, you thought you were at the center and now you're not.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, I think we've come to the end, and I'm done with everything that I wanted to do. I think it came out about right. Is there anything else that anybody wants to offer? Any questions you have? If not, then I guess Sandy will lead us out of here, but I wanted to give one last opportunity for anything that anybody might have for the sake of the room.
I just want to say thank you. This has been an amazing second Saturday.
That's right. I agree.
And really meaningful. So thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I want to echo that too. Thank you, Warren. This was really certainly what I needed today. So thank you.
Good. Well, I'm glad I could do it. Happy to do it.
Thank you. So we will be following up with the participants with links to the recordings in case you want to go back and hear anything again, and a link to the Well-Fed Spirit website, because I think there's a lot of resources on there. And then just a note that next month, second Saturday, is storytelling with Rebecca Anderson will be our guest presenter, which I think will be fun also. So again, blessings to all of you, and thank you again, Warren. This was just absolutely wonderful. And we really
Well, thank you. Thank you for letting me make a trip back to the Northern Lights region for just a little bit.